I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
Most of us think that to feel more loved, we need to sort of become more lovable.
That's the world-renowned happiness researcher and professor Sonja Lyubomirsky talking about her newest book, How to Feel Loved.
The first step, if I want to feel more loved by you, is actually to make you feel more loved first. And the way I do it is by showing genuine curiosity in you.
Today we talk about her groundbreaking research on happiness and what that can tell us about connection, relationship, and the benefits of vulnerability.
These walls are there to protect ourselves, like they serve a purpose, but they prevent us from truly being known. And if you don't really know me, I'm going to argue that I'm never really going to feel loved by you, because I'm going to wonder if he really knew me, would he still love me?
That and much more coming right up. Hey friends, Lee Camp here. We all need advice, but it's not always clear who to ask, even in 2026, which is why I recommend checking out How To, the long-standing advice show and 2026 AMBY Award-nominated Best Personal Growth Podcast. No Small Endeavor was also just up for the very same award in that category, so How To must be a great companion to our show. More than that, How To is back with new episodes and a new host with award-winning journalist Mike Pesca. Each week, Mike tackles a listener question ranging from travel to finance to relationships and beyond, with help from world-class experts who actually know what they are talking about. Think of it as eavesdropping on someone else's therapy session without a copay or awkward silence. No questions too big or too specific, like how to protect the elderly from scammers, or how to give to a good cause and make it count, and even how to make a how-to podcast. You've got questions, they will find some answers, so follow How To with Mike Pesca on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
People told me I was crazy, basically, that it was very fuzzy and unscientific, and you can't really study happiness. People still tell me that sometimes.
That's Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky. She's talking about the reaction she got from the academic community when she first began studying happiness back in 1989. At the time, she was a brand new graduate student at Stanford, and no one had any idea just how popular her chosen subject would turn out to be.
I'm in this top psychology department. Amos Tversky was on the faculty, Lee Ross, really top scholars. And they're all doing these fancy experiments, testing very specific hypotheses. And I'm interviewing people who are happy and unhappy. So I felt very insecure.
Despite her doubts and the raised eyebrows of her peers, Sonja went on to interview hundreds of subjects. She wanted to know exactly what it is that makes some of us happy and some of us not. And in time, she discovered 3 major contributing factors.
The first bucket is genetics, and it's pretty clear. There's not a single gene. There's thousands of genes, and they get turned on and off, influence our happiness, right? Some people are just born with a kind of a set range that is higher or lower than others.
The second set of influences she discovered are, perhaps not surprisingly, life circumstances. If someone is living in poverty or in a war zone or is stuck in a bad relationship, clearly that's going to impact their happiness. But Sonja says that beyond getting our basic needs met, our material and other circumstances have much less to do with our overall happiness than we typically presume. Getting a new car, buying a bigger house, might lead to a temporary boost in our sense of well-being, but the effects far from permanent. And that is due to a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation.
Human beings are very good at becoming accustomed to changes in our lives, especially positive changes. So you move to a nicer home, and at first you really appreciate the nicer surroundings, but then after a time you get used to it. And then you start thinking, I really want to renovate my bathroom because it's not as nice as I'd like it to be. So human beings always kind of want more. We sort of reach a goal and then we adapt to that goal, and then we want to reach the next goal. And if that process wasn't evident, maybe progress advances would stop. But there's a cost, because if you get accustomed to your car or to your wife or to your job, it's a challenge to happiness.
So Sonja wondered, are we only as happy as our genetic code, destined for a life of temporary highs until hedonic adaptation pulls us back to baseline? Or Is there something else at play? She began designing experiments around the possibility of a third factor of happiness, that we might be able to increase our happiness via behavioral interventions, things like gratitude lists or acts of kindness towards other people. And while it may sound simple, she discovered that we have a lot more control over our happiness than one might imagine. So, she hypothesized years ago that a significant contributing factor to our happiness on any given day is indebted to our genetic makeup, with a surprisingly small factor in our happiness being the circumstances that we wrongly presume will make us profoundly happy or unhappy. That leaves a large portion of our capacity for happiness up for grabs by us. And it turns out there are all kinds of habits and practices, or so-called interventions, that we can adopt to fill our happiness bucket with some pretty surprising results.
We take blood from participants. We randomly assign them either to do acts of kindness for others or do acts of kindness for themselves. We find that people who do acts of kindness for others, they actually show changes in their gene expression associated with a healthier immune profile.
This work led to her 2007 bestseller, The How of Happiness, a scientific approach to getting the life you want. And since then, Sonja has become one of the most important researchers working in the science of happiness today. And now, she and her colleagues are taking that research one step further.
We kept doing these interventions, and it hit me one day that all of these interventions, especially sort of these gratitude and kindness interventions, the reason they work to make us happier is that they make us feel more connected to others. And so then I started thinking, well, maybe it's really all about connection. And then I started talking to Harry Reese, who's been studying relationships for 40-something years. And he agreed. The difference between happy and unhappy people really is that happy people feel loved. And so we started working on this book together.
And Sonja is here today to talk about that very new book, How to Feel Loved, the 5 mindsets that get you more of what matters most.
Most of us think that to feel more loved, we need to sort of become more lovable. It's basically to sort of impress the person more with how wonderful we are. And that does succeed in impressing you. I might even get you to admire me, but it's not going to forge a connection, sort of this process where we just want to show off our good qualities and maybe hide our shortcomings. And if you don't really know me, I think I'm going to argue that I'm never really going to feel loved by you, because I'm going to wonder if he really knew me, would he still love me, right? So a lot of the book is about how do I become known to you?
So today, I interview with Sonja Lyubomirsky. Professor Lyubomirsky, welcome.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have you with us. As I was telling you before we started taping, I started using your book, The How of Happiness, in one of my undergraduate classes, maybe a decade ago, but it's blessed and been a gift to a lot of people. And I thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that book is still resonating years later with people because it was about sort of 12 different ways to become happier. And so, yeah, I think most people want to be happy.
Yes, indeed. A lot of the philosophers and a lot of the theologians would say that's kind of the ultimate question. And here you are having fashioned a career about one of the ultimate questions of being human. And so I wonder if you think back to your childhood, your family being Russian immigrants, what was it in your childhood maybe that perhaps first enkindled in you an interest in questions about happiness?
I immigrated from the Soviet Union when I was 9 years old, and I noticed right away the cultural differences. Russians don't look happy when you encounter them on the street, but if you go into their homes, people are drinking and singing, so actually they're quite vibrant and cheerful. But anyway, I noticed cultural differences, so that was one of the interests I had. When you immigrated, my mom became really unhappy because I think she didn't realize how hard it was for her to leave her home country, and Russians are very much connected to the land, to the country, to the people, the culture. And so then I also was always interested in sort of how to make her happier. And actually my college honors thesis advisor, who I hadn't seen in like 30 years, came to visit me a few years ago. And he said, yeah, you were really interested in happiness when you were in college. You talked about that a lot. And I didn't realize that. I thought it started in grad school, actually.
Yeah. So you then go on after your undergrad, you go to Stanford, and I've read this story about some kind of revelatory moment that occurs as you're walking through a Rodin sculpture garden at Stanford. How did that then enkindle further interest in the subject?
Yeah, so the very first day of grad school, I met with my new advisor. His name is Lee Ross, and he was the world's expert on like conflict and negotiation. So kind of like the opposite to happiness. Back then, he was studying Palestinians and Israelis and how to reduce conflict. And we took this walk, and I think he was the one to ask the question out of the blue, like, what is the secret to happiness? And why are some people happier than others? So we just started talking about it. And then back then, only one person, Ed Diener, was studying happiness. He didn't even call it happiness. He called it subjective well-being. There really was no field of the science of happiness. This was in 1989.
Yeah. When you did that early descriptive work, what were things that you began to see in simply trying to describe who's particularly unhappy, who's particularly happy?
Sure. Well, great question. I still remember the very first question I had was I thought that it was about social comparison, how we compare ourselves to others. I had this sort of idea that, well, people who are happier, they must compare themselves to people who are worse off so they feel better about themselves. And people who are unhappy probably compare up. It's called upward social comparison. And they think, oh, that person is more attractive or richer or smarter than me. So that's why they're unhappy. And it's a reasonable hypothesis, but I was completely wrong. And when I asked people who are happy and unhappy who they compare themselves to, the sort of less happy people would tell me all these stories. Oh, yes, I compare themselves to this person. It makes me feel bad, et cetera. But the happy people almost like didn't know what I was talking about. They were like, what do you mean? And it's not that they didn't compare, but it just wasn't part of their like internal life. They didn't let those comparisons affect their self-esteem and their sort of mood as much. And so I was wrong. I mean, people who are happy just don't compare themselves as much or don't let it affect them as much. Yeah.
That's so fascinating. In some writing on moral formation, there is a lot of conversation about moral exemplars and the importance of moral exemplars in moral formation. How do you distinguish between helpful comparison or attention to a moral exemplar for the sake of one's own moral formation and this sort of destructive or at least related to unhappiness comparison that we'd want to stay away from?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's some research on this idea that some comparisons that are quote upward comparisons, they are inspiring. Let's say you want to play the violin and there's like a violin virtuoso that you look up to and you don't feel bad. They're like, oh my God, I'm not as good as them. You actually are inspired and you want to be like them. So I think someone who's a lot more virtuous or a lot more excellent at something that you are actually can be like a very helpful comparison.
So let me ask you to give us a working definition, or maybe your working definition of happiness.
Well, I define happiness the way that Ed Diener defined happiness. So he's the founder of the science of well-being that I mentioned, was doing research in the 80s. He really was the first one. So he defines happiness as having two components. And I think of it as being happy in your life and being happy with your life. Being happy with your life is basically thinking your life is good, being satisfied with your life, thinking you're making progress towards your goals at a good pace. But being happy in your life is really the experience of positive emotions, right? Throughout the day or the week, sometimes you experience joy, serenity, enthusiasm, affection, curiosity, pride. Depending on the person, you might experience a different mix. So really being happy in your life and being happy with your life are the two components of happiness.
So then you move from descriptive work, and then with the How of Happiness, you're looking much more at causal factors and or potential interventions to help elevate self-reports, I suppose, on happiness. So kind of describe the move that you make there theoretically of what the question you're beginning to ask there.
Right. Well, from the beginning, reporters, journalists started calling me, even in grad school. And they would ask me questions like, what does your work suggest to our readers? Like, what should our readers do to be happier? So just getting back to that social comparison work, I did this research showing that happy people don't compare themselves as much. So they said, should we tell our readers one should not compare themselves as much to others? And I would always say, I don't know, right? Because it's a correlation.
Right.
Of course, they hate that answer, right? I'm like, well, it depends. I don't know. Just because something's correlated doesn't mean it's causal, right? And I also thought I was kind of elitist. And I thought, well, this is a very applied question. I am a basic scientist. And I was really misguided because the question of how people can become happier is actually a very interesting basic science question too. And so I started doing what I call happiness interventions in 1998. They're basically clinical trials, but instead of testing a vaccine or a medication, we're testing a happiness practice. So we might randomly assign, these are all randomized controlled trials, randomly assign a certain number of people to express gratitude in a particular way, maybe express gratitude in a different way, and then maybe do something neutral. And then we follow them across time and measure their happiness and some other outcomes to see what works best.
And then that leads kind of somewhat famously to your pie analogy in How of Happiness. So would you describe that for us?
Sure. And I actually regret using that pie analogy because people take the numbers that we set out too seriously. But basically, the way I'll describe it is that when you think about like what are the main contributors to happiness, there are really three buckets of influences on happiness. And the first bucket is genetics. The second set of influences on happiness are life circumstances, right? Especially if your circumstances are not good, So the third set of influences is really what I study with the interventions, is that those are the things that we can actually really control every day, the ways that we think, the ways that we behave that can influence how happy we are. That's what the interventions are testing.
Yeah. I think the one that is most surprising to people is that, give or take on the number again, you're suggesting that circumstances have a much lower correlation or relation to our happiness than most of us presume. So expound upon that for us some.
Yeah. So the circumstances don't affect our happiness as much as we think they will, but this really applies to people who are already kind of relatively comfortable, right? So again, if you live in poverty, if you live in a war zone, if you're in an abusive relationship, your life circumstances are going to have like a 90% effect on your happiness. I don't want to go into the statistics, but maybe most of your listeners are like relatively comfortable. They're not really suffering in their circumstances. Then, improving your circumstances is probably not going to change your happiness as much as you think it will. It probably will at the beginning. So you move into a nicer apartment. I don't know, you change your job to a better job. You buy a new car, right? So that will probably make you happier. But then over time, we tend to kind of revert back to our baseline. So my second book, The Myths of Happiness, is really about that.
Yeah. But explicit there is this assertion that there are still things that you really can focus on that can have some sort of upward impact upon your happiness. You discuss 12 in the book and give various exercises for those 12 practices. What are some that among those 12 that have especially stood out to you that you've continued to see the research has supported those in very helpful ways?
Sure. One of the practices that I've really focused a lot about in my research career is gratitude. It's under the umbrella of sort of positive thinking. And we shouldn't be sort of thinking positive all the time. Like that's not healthy. But I think gratitude is so powerful, so rich. Such an interesting, fascinating, actually, state to study. We all have a lot to be grateful for, sort of no matter what our circumstances is. So gratitude is one. Another one is doing acts of kindness for others, sort of doing good for others. It takes the focus off of yourself. One of the most toxic things actually is sort of too much self-focus. Mm-hmm. And so anything you can do to take the focus off of you and onto others, I think, can make people happier. Again, it makes you feel more connected. Taking your nephew out to the circus or helping your neighbor or giving to charity or opening the door for someone. It could be really like a variety of kind acts. So we do a lot of studies where we prompt people to do more kind acts sort of every week. We even show that it gets under the skin. We take blood before and after a kind acts intervention. And we find that people who do kind acts for others, they actually show changes in their gene expression associated with a healthier immune profile.
So many things I want to follow up there on. Let's go back to gratitude just a second. What are some of your favorite gratitude exercises? Let's say somebody's listening and they think, yeah, I'm just not very good at that. So where to start?
For me, I think writing gratitude letters or writing gratitude texts or something like that is very meaningful and easy. But I've talked to people who are like artists and they might like draw something that they're grateful for, or they create like a gratitude collage, or they call someone on the phone and they just tell them on the phone that they're grateful.
Yeah.
So
I learned the old gratitude list years ago, and just writing 10 things down in the morning that I'm grateful for. I kind of pushed myself to make that a mix of things historically that I'm grateful for, things just right in the moment that are very tangible, like a cup of coffee or the dog curled up next to me. And then I also noticed that sometimes I would go through seasons where I would do that so often it became a chore. Mm-hmm. And so I would start letting Friday be my gratitude day, where I would take a long walk and I would count up 50 things I was grateful for on my walk. And it just had this huge boost in my happiness. So yeah, I just find all that stuff just so fascinating.
I love that. And me too, actually. Yeah. And we've done some research showing that you don't want it to be so habitual that it becomes a chore. You kind of adapt to it. And so I have actually a practice on Sunday mornings where I write down like what I'm grateful for that happened that week. And I just keep that on my computer. And actually, sometimes just reading what you wrote is also really rewarding.
Talk to us a little bit more about hedonic adaptation, what that is and what we've learned about that.
So hedonic adaptation is the phenomenon that human beings are very good at becoming accustomed to changes in our lives, especially positive changes. So you move to a nicer home, and at first you really appreciate the nicer surroundings. But then after a time, you start thinking, oh, I really want to like renovate my bathroom because it's not as nice as I'd like it to be. So human beings always kind of want more. Like we sort of reach a goal, and then we adapt to that goal, and then we want to reach the next goal.
One could think adaptation as a driver towards human progress, cultural progress, And at the same time, one could think of it as a driver in greed that's going to be deeply unsatisfying. So how do we navigate that in such a way so that it's helpful and constructive to us as opposed to destructive?
Maybe part of it has to do with what the goals are. There's research on different kinds of goals. There's extrinsic goals and intrinsic goals. And extrinsic goals are goals to make more money, to be sort of more famous, more beautiful, more powerful, higher status. And those goals are not associated with happiness, or maybe even associated sometimes with unhappiness. But intrinsic goals are goals that have to do with connection, connecting to others, contributing to community, personal growth, learning new things. And those are things that we don't adapt. We still might adapt to them a little bit, but we don't adapt as fast. And they're also goals that help human beings kind of advance. So I guess that's one of my answers. Focus more on the intrinsic goals.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Sonja Lyubomirsky. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in the episode and a full transcript. And we also have a free bi-monthly newsletter. Actually, now it's a weekly newsletter in which I riff on themes and behind-the-scenes goings-on called the NSE Notebook. You can subscribe to that newsletter for free by going to our website at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. Coming up, good Professor Lyubomirsky and I discuss the 5 mindsets in her latest book, How to Feel Loved, and why visualizing a seesaw could help you navigate vulnerability in new relationships. Hey friends, one of the things that we've learned from listeners is that many of you don't want to just listen to these conversations. You'd like to go deeper than that. That's part of why we created NSE Plus, which is our subscriber community, where we share additional conversations, reflections, and bonus material connected to the themes of the show, especially looking for ways that this can relate to the practice of your own life. Recently, we started a new series called Reflections on a Good Life, in which I share brief reflections arising from some of our favorite NSE interviews. You might think of it as a weekly 7-minute episode in which I pull out some pearl of wisdom from an interview and suggest a question on which you might choose to meditate to further cultivate some goodness in your own life. We've also launched a new bonus series called Books You Should Know. In the first installment, I sat down with Dr. Lee Warren for a conversation that quickly became one of my favorite interviews I've done in quite a while. It's all waiting for you over at NSE Plus. And just as importantly, NSE Plus is what helps keep No Small Endeavor on the air and available for free to everyone. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month, and if these conversations have been meaningful to you, we would truly love to have you join us. You can learn more at nosmallendeavor.com or click the link in the show notes and join NSE Plus. I was trying to get my head around a way to ask this next question because it's kind of been rumbling in the back of my mind for a few years now. And that's the question about instrumentalizing these practices. With Aristotle, for example, the happy person is the good person, that you seek these intrinsic goods because they are good in and of themselves, and happiness is seen as a sort of concomitant with goodness. And yet there seems to be, when we think about interventions, say, of, practice this intervention and you'll be happier, it's almost as if one potential danger of that could be that we're instrumentalizing it. So, for example, I express gratitude to my father for his love for me. The danger would be that I'm now kind of using my father so that I can be happier. How do you think about that?
Yeah. And that's an excellent question. I guess there's maybe a fine line. It almost seems manipulative, right? Or strategic, transactional, where you're like doing something to make yourself happy. And we have this danger in our studies too, right? I, the experimenter, is telling you, why don't you go write a letter of gratitude? Now, when we do that in our studies, we try to give the participants a lot of autonomy and sort of choice. We say, do 3 acts of kindness this week, but choose what you do. And we kind of get them to sort of own it in a way that doesn't make it seem so kind of transactional or strategic or manipulative. I mean, that's one response. And another response, and I believe His Holiness the Dalai Lama actually talked about this, that there's nothing actually wrong with benefiting in terms of your own happiness from helping others, right? So like, that's okay. Most things that we do in our lives actually have multiple determinants, right? So when kids study at school, they might study just to get good grades, but they also might study because they want to learn. And that's okay to have those multiple motives. Like for most things, it's not so clean that we have these sort of virtuous motives versus non-virtuous motives. And it's okay to have multiple motives. And so it's okay to feel good when you show courage, or to feel happy when you express gratitude to your father. If your motive is only your own happiness and you don't really care about your father very much, then, well, that's probably not going to make you very happy. So I think it's okay. Like, humans are complex.
Yeah, I find that quite helpful. And I think for me as well, when I was younger, I would encounter sometimes certain theological traditions that were very critical of any kind of pragmatism. They had this kind of notion of God's divine will as being, this is what God says, just do it and it's good, and it doesn't matter if it works. And I increasingly found that really odd. It's like, just from a theological perspective, if you believe that God is good and God has given us a life such that we are as we are, unless you think God is simply capricious and angry, then it seems to me that it would make sense that things that we think are good are also pragmatically true. And thus, I can express kindness, gratitude, and thus it cultivates a genuine, mutually beneficial joy and happiness. Somehow holding those together.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I sometimes will get emails saying, everything you study is in the Bible. Kindness and gratitude and forgiveness and the importance of relationships. And that's not a coincidence, right? That these are things really are good, and they're good for us, and they're evolutionarily adaptive, and we believe they're good, and they also make us feel happy.
You said that in your work in looking at these various practices that contribute to happiness, that you began to wonder if all of them in some way don't simply contribute to social connection, relational connection. And so that seems to be the obvious connection to the new book, How to Feel Loved. So maybe kind of give us the big framework there that is driving that new book.
Yeah. So my lab and I had been doing these interventions for like 25 years and now 28 years. And so, yeah, it sort of hit me one day that almost all of the interventions that work to make us happier, they work because they make us feel more loved by or more connected to others. And then I started talking to Harry Reese, who's my co-author of the book, and he's a love scientist, a relationship scientist. So we started talking about that, and he agreed. The difference between happy and unhappy people really is that happy people feel loved.
Let's talk about the notion of being known versus being impressive. I suppose we tend to think that people will like us more if we can impress them, but you're pointing to, well, no, there's a different way of going about this.
The book is called How to Feel Loved. And so it's about, so what do you do to feel loved? So most people, about 70% will say that there's at least one relationship in their life that they want to feel more loved in. And it could be your child, parent, colleague, romantic partner. But most of us think that to feel more loved, we need to sort of become more lovable. And when you think about when you meet a new person, this is actually a great example. Like, I'm meeting you for the first time. And, I want you to think that I'm, interesting and smart and kind and virtuous and funny, right? And so that's what we do often at a first meeting, whether it's on a first date or a professional meeting. I might succeed in impressing you. I might even get you to admire me, but it's not going to forge a connection. And it's hit us that really the secret to feeling loved is to be known, for you to really know me and for me to really know you. And it's kind of this idea that we're all walking around really with walls around us. And when you think about it, it's so true. They serve a purpose, but they prevent us from truly being known. So a lot of the book is about, how do I become known to you? And how do I really truly know you? And that's where the 5 mindsets come in. And so like the first one we talk about, we call the sharing mindset. And that is like, from you to know me, I need to open up and share something more about myself, not just my positive pieces.
I want to talk about more of those mindsets in just a moment. But before we go to those, you also have a seesaw metaphor, that there's this sort of reciprocity of allowing ourselves to be seen and cultivating that in the other person. So kind of unpack that metaphor for us.
Sure. So the seesaw metaphor, imagine that you and I are sitting on a seesaw, but we're submerged in water. And most of ourselves is submerged in water. And this is sort of a metaphor that we keep most of ourselves hidden from you, right? Like, I only show you kind of the tip of myself, which is sort of maybe the positive part. And you do too. And so what I do is I first start by kind of lifting you out. So my goal is kind of to lift you out of the water a little bit so I get to know you better. And so the first thing I do, this is actually something maybe I could backtrack a little bit. The first step, if I want to feel more loved by you, is actually to make you feel more loved first. And the way I do it is by showing genuine curiosity in you. So really showing interest in your inner life, in your world, in sort of the details of your day. And so when I show real interest in you, the idea is that you will feel moved to sort of share something about yourself. And you'll feel also sort of safe and trusting. And so you will start telling your stories, start telling me a little bit more about yourself or what you're feeling and thinking that day. And then when you do, I listen, and I really listen well. Most of us are not very good listeners, including myself. Most of us, when we argue, we listen to respond, right? I'm not really listening. I'm just kind of rehearsing my answer. I'm rehearsing whatever I'm going to say to you. We recommend that people listen to learn, right? To listen, to really truly be present. So I'm showing curiosity in you, and that sort of I'm sort of pressing down on the seesaw. I'm lifting you out of the water a little bit. I'm really interested and I'm really caring. I'm asking you questions. Research shows that we don't ask each other enough questions that are real questions, that are deep questions we think will be seen as prying or nosy, but actually on average, people really want to be asked. So ask questions. And I'm also showing warmth and acceptance, because maybe you'll share something uncomfortable or something negative. I sort of see you in your full humanity. I'm lifting you out of the water. And then what happens next? You reciprocate. And reciprocity is one of the most powerful social norms, right? It's evolutionarily adaptive that we reciprocate. And so you reciprocate, and now you will hopefully show an interest in me that's genuine. And then I will start opening up and telling my story, and you also reciprocate with warmth and recognition and acceptance. It's really a gift, right? That listening, the curiosity, the warmth and acceptance is really a gift to the other person.
Yeah, I love the emphasis there upon learning to ask good questions. So for you, what makes for a good set of questions in this kind of scenario?
Yeah, I love this topic too. Actually, my students and I are actually discussing right now, doing some more studies just on question asking, because we don't ask enough questions of each other. Actually, I have an example. My oldest daughter has roommates. One of her roommates was clearly having some kind of problem. Her family was coming over and they were whispering about things that were happening. So I said to my daughter, why do you talk to your roommate? Ask her what's going on. And she said, "Oh, I can't do that, Mom. She'll think I'm prying." And that may be true in this case, but I think on average, people want to be asked. Like, I bet she will actually feel very much seen and recognized, like we want to be seen and heard. Anyway, so yeah, I'm a big proponent of asking questions. There's all these question decks you can buy or get them off the web. My favorite is called The And, because their questions are really, really good questions, but there's so many of these. So I'm a fan of getting one of these question decks and using them. I have friends who do it on dates. They'll just bring questions with them and ask questions. And pacing is really important. So you don't want to start too deep. And also in terms of sharing too, you don't want to reveal your deepest secrets and traumas, no trauma dumping. Emotional intelligence is really needed here for the seesaw, is to really read the person, gauge their curiosity. Do they really want you to say more about yourself? Gauge for cues like, should I ask you that question now? Because if I ask you a question that's too deep right now, your walls might come right back up again. But some of my favorite questions are things like, what's been on your mind a lot lately? You could answer in lots of different ways. Tell me about a family member this year who really surprised you. What's a mistake you made that you've learned a lot from? That's sort of the best mistake you've made. Deeper questions are things like, when was the last time you cried? What's a dream that you have not accomplished, and why have you not achieved that dream? There's so many questions. I kind of hate small talk. I understand that sometimes you need it as a sort of a social lubricant, right? And by the way, small talk, there's research on if you do small talk with your barista at the coffee shop, that actually is beautiful. Like it kind of, or with the Uber driver, it helps you connect as a human to another human.
Yeah, it can be a form of kindness.
Total. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
In my mind, I've kind of thought of trying to keep a list of questions ready at hand that kind of become some of my go-tos. But I was just thinking, I think one of the most interesting questions I've heard someone suggest came from David Brooks at the New York Times. And he told me that one of his favorite questions is to ask someone, what question did I not ask you that you wish I had asked you? And I find that to be a very helpful question.
I'm going to add to that. One is, tell me more, which is just so simple. when you think about it, that's what we want. And when it's really genuine, you really want to like, tell me more. What happened next? What were you really thinking? Another one is like, what do you wish people knew about you or that I knew about you that I don't, which is a little bit similar to that. I love the David Brooks column and, his book, How to Know a Person, has some very, very relevant work in it. And then in this question deck that I mentioned, the deepest question, this is for people who know each other well, is, it's almost hard for me to say it because it's so deep. Ask me something you're afraid to ask me.
Wow.
I mean, imagine that. Imagine a romantic, right? Yeah. Right? Ask me something like you've been afraid to ask me. Like, wow. Anyway, that's like the most advanced level. You don't have to go there.
Yeah.
But we crave to be seen and heard. I mean, some people will tell you like the details of their day and they'll go on and on. They'll be like, oh, I went to run this errand and I couldn't find a parking space and then blah, 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 this happened. Kind of boring, right? To listen to these details of the day. And yet they'll go on. And it's so interesting to me because as a psychologist, it just shows you how we all want to be seen. Like they want people to know about the details of their day. And like if you show curiosity in the details of someone's inner life, like again, that's a gift. That's an act of kindness.
Yeah. You talking about the seesaw metaphor, it made me start thinking about if I'll pay attention to what I want, that oftentimes can give me great cues as to other things to offer to others. So the one that came to my mind is that I'm flashing back to a dinner that I had with some friends here lately. And we were sitting in a restaurant and someone had asked me a question and I started to tell a story that related to that question. And the waitress came and we went to order. And then when the waitress left, someone else picked up the conversation completely somewhere differently. And which then made me think, okay, well, my story wasn't very interesting or they didn't really want to hear. But what I wanted someone to say is, Lee, finish your story. And I think that night someone actually did say that to me. But what it's taught me is that if I'm in that similar situation and somebody else is telling a story, one very simple way to help them feel loved is simply to say, hey, you didn't get to finish your story, finish telling your story. But I love that kind of reciprocity you're pointing us to, right? Is that whatever I feel, whether it's a gift to me or whether I feel somewhat overlooked, I can turn that around and then give that to somebody else. And then all of a sudden it's this beautiful kind of exchange.
Absolutely. It shows that you're really, you're listening, you're paying attention to that person, you're listening, you're making them feel seen.
Coming up, a short break, followed by Sonja's thoughts on spirituality and the time she met the Dalai Lama.
Are you curious about the hidden side of everything? Then I have a podcast for you. I'm Stephen Dubner, host of Freakonomics Radio. Each week, we hear from some of the most fascinating scholars and thinkers as we tackle big topics like how whales became the face of environmental activism, how to succeed at failing, and whether public transportation should be free. Go ahead, listen to Freakonomics Radio wherever you get your podcasts.
When you want your spring break to feel like... and your kids' pool day to feel like... and your hotel bed to feel like... ooh, and room service to feel like... because at Hilton, hospitality feels like...
Your cabana's ready. Would you like fresh towels?
It matters where you stay. Book now at Hilton.com. Hilton, for the stay.
Picture this, a curve in the road, a change in plans. Well, what do you say? With the all-new Audi Q3, the answer's always yes. Yes to adventure. Yes to escape. Yes to performance. Yes to comfort. Yes to right now. Because saying yes without hesitation, that's real luxury. The all-new Audi Q3, made for the yes life.
So sharing mindset, listening to learn mindset, radical curiosity mindset, open heart mindset. Anything else you want to say about any of those four?
Yeah. An open heart is basically showing warmth and compassion and believing in someone, wanting the other person to be happy, which is very important. The last mindset is one of my favorites. We call multiplicity. And it actually comes from trauma research. idea that if you have a trauma, it doesn't define you as a person. And so the idea that any kind of one trait and one behavior doesn't define you, that we are more than one thing, and that we really are many things, right? We're multitudes, as Walt Whitman said. We are like a quilt of both positive and negative qualities, right? So I can be loyal sometimes and narcissistic at other times, right? I'm kind sometimes and I'm selfish other times. And I think we're all like that. And we kind of know that implicitly, but to really like bring that to the surface and to really like remember that when you look at others, right? So when someone is telling you their story, to really see them in their sort of messy kind of humanity, right? We all have these negative and positive qualities. And also to turn the multiplicity mindset onto yourself. Because when you behave badly, say, doesn't mean that you, by the way, condone or excuse that, but you sort of have compassion for yourself. That one behavior doesn't define you as a person.
Yeah. What do you think are specific concrete ways to facilitate bringing that mindset to, especially maybe fraught relationships or relationships that have been difficult?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of caveats, right? So sometimes you need to walk away from a relationship, right? So I don't, the research on forgiveness has this balance as well. Like, I think it's very important to forgive. It's sort of beneficial for lots of reasons. And yet there are times that person is not treating you well and that sort of forgiving them is going to be harmful to you. And so I guess I want to add that caveat, but assuming that the person really does want to be better and mean well and want you to be happy, that I think using multiplicity is so powerful and it's really hard as well. I think curiosity is also related. And so like in the middle of a conflict, to be curious instead of shutting down and being defensive. I think it's really, really hard to be like, wow, they are really angry. Like, why are they so angry? And where is that coming from? Multiplicity also suggests like really looking at the big picture, the triggers for that person, and this happens all the time, right? Like there's someone in my life right now who's sort of, I feel like not really showing up in our relationship as much as I would like them to. And I actually have been thinking about like multiplicity for them is like thinking like, this is like where they are at. This is the best they can do right now. That may not be good enough for me, but it's really helpful to sort of think like maybe they are sort of at capacity, and because of their history or because of maybe they're depressed, maybe because of their family issues, whatever. Again, it's not condoning or excusing or justifying, but it is helping us understand that person's behavior and then helping us understand what to do next, right? Because sometimes we do want to walk away and other times we help and work with them and,
Yeah, thank you. I want to kind of move to maybe 2 or 3 unrelated questions as we move towards a close. In the How of Happiness, you talk about spirituality and or religious practice and see that as one evidence-based strategy for well-being. I read somewhere that you described yourself in the past as not having, I think this was a quote, a spiritual bone in your body. So what's that been like for you to investigate that, and how has that informed your own kind of lived experience?
It's actually hilarious because I have a friend who just still laughs at that line. And I don't think it's true. I mean, I think I did believe that at the time. I think now that I have more life experience and I have a big picture, I sort of realize that like all humans are spiritual beings. So it obviously depends on how you define spirituality. And so, a couple of things. In terms of religion, I look at the research. Obviously, religion is associated with so many good things, right? People who are religious are happier. Now, you can look at sort of why, that people who are religious or spiritual report having greater meaning. They're better able to cope with adversity. They have stronger communities and relationships. And so all of those things, we can learn a lot from that research. And then with spirituality, again, I'm not an expert on this, but I think there's a lot of sort of unknowns in the universe. I think it's actually kind of beautiful to sort of have these questions about what the universe has in store for us. So anyway, I do see this differently now than I did more than 20 years ago that I wrote the first book.
You had some time that you spent with the Dalai Lama. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was really incredible to spend time with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We went to, my co-author Harry Reese and I, with a group, we went to Dharamsala, India. I'd met His Holiness before years ago as well, a couple of times at various sort of dialogues. But this was really memorable, partly because it was in India. A couple of things that His Holiness said that really stayed with me. One was, he said at one point, excessive self-focus is the door to all misery.
Oh my.
Yeah, excessive self-focus is the door to all misery, which I thought was so wise, and totally aligned with research. I was saying before how like anything we can do to take our mind and attention off of ourselves, often it's helpful, makes us happier. But then the other thing is he said that Love is not a feeling. Love is a decision. And I was like, wow. And it really hit me. I mean, you can interpret that in different ways. But our book, How to Feel Loved, is really about kind of making a decision about how to approach your next conversation differently. And that was a powerful one. Love is not a feeling. Love is a decision. Oh, one more thing I want to say that really affected me that I still talk to people about. He said, I'm your mother and you are my mother. We are all each other's mothers. And he said, how can we harm each other when we are all each other's mothers? So I think it's an old Buddhist concept. And I will sometimes talk to a friend and I'll say, or my kids, I'll say, I'm your mother, but you're also my mother.
Lovely. That's beautiful.
Is that beautiful?
Yes. Thank you for that. So what are you seeing with regard to tech, digital connection, or lack thereof with all of the research that you're doing?
Tech can certainly help us connect. And so I don't see it as sort of black and white, all, texting and social media and all are all bad, although there's certainly a lot of costs. Anything that helps people connect to one another, I'm a fan of. And sometimes technology can be amazing. We've had au pairs for our kids for many years, and they used to be really homesick. And then there came a time where they sort of stopped being homesick because they were constantly connected with their family and friends back at they're mostly from Germany. AI is a new challenge to connection, but it's also helping people connect. People who are very, very lonely are finding like AI companions incredibly helpful. There's a study that came out in China where women in China were using AI chatbots to help them to have conflict discussions with their husbands where they have less power in the relationship. And they actually are benefiting from these sort of role playing that they're doing. Is that amazing? And so I think there could be some benefits, and AI chatbots are the best listeners that you'll ever have in your life. They're the most curious, right? They'll remember everything you've ever said. They'll pick up that conversation whether you're interrupted, right? But I believe that they can't make us feel as loved as actual humans. In part because of authenticity, right? Because we need to believe that person has made a decision to make us feel loved and that really wants us to be happy. And they can fool us, just like when I go to a movie and I can laugh and cry and be scared, right? I know it's not real. And I think similarly, we're kind of fooled by them not being, quote, real. But it's something that's going to be a big challenge for our society to consider.
Yeah. Well, as we go out, if somebody's listening, they're drawn in by all of this fascinating research you've done and that you shared with us today. Where do they start? Where's one or two places they can start right now in putting some of this stuff into practice?
Choose someone in your life, one person, and ask them questions and show curiosity in them. But find something that you're genuinely curious about, right? Because it has to be genuine. You can't fake it. And then truly listen to them and share more. In fact, when you think about the polarized society we live in, all these divides across politics, religion, identity, sharing vulnerably with one another is really helpful. A study actually just came out when people who are very different on political spectrum, when they start sharing about their lives, like personal details, they actually feel much more connected and they feel like they understand each other better. So curiosity, listening, and sharing, I think are so important. So start with one person today, I would say.
Been talking to Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky on her book from a number of years ago, The How of Happiness, and her most recent book, How to Feel Loved with Harry Reese. Professor, thank you. This has been a lovely conversation. Very grateful for your work and your time today.
Thank you so much, Lee. You've asked me a number of questions that I've never been asked before, which is a huge compliment because I've been asked many questions over the past 30 years or so.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you. Here's one closing take on today's interview. First, that piercing line Sonja heard from the Dalai Lama, excessive self-focus is the door to all misery. I literally, just now, as I'm writing these words, I wrote that on a note card and taped it to the back of my office door. Excessive self-focus is the door to all misery. Misery, thus, may not arrive dramatically. It may simply seep in quietly, maybe even respectably, through the doorway of my own attention simply being focused too much on me. Instead, as she noted, anything you can do to take the focus off of you and onto others can make people happier, like gratitude, like kindness, for the sake of kindness and for the sake of connection. This connects to Sonja's warning about our self-performance before another, that by doing so, I might get you to admire me, but it's not going to forge a connection, she said. If I spend my life being impressive rather than allowing myself to be known, I may accumulate admiration, but be starved for love. And yet again, we see yet another one of our guests point us to the indispensable importance of vulnerability. Indeed, the whole episode was rich with additional proposed practices. So, as already noted, maybe start first by taking attention off yourself and then placing it upon the one whom you wish might love you more. Show genuine curiosity in them. Make the first move. Then discipline your ears. Most of us listen to respond, she said. So she went on, we recommend that people listen to learn. Compound the possibilities here by learning to ask better questions, like, what's been on your mind a lot lately? Or even, if the trust is there, ask me something you're afraid to ask me. None of this is flashy. It might even feel like a slow way forward, like a long road ahead. But it just might be the long road out of self-absorption and into love. That's a small, but not so small take on today's episode. Peace to you, my friend. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with Sonja Lyubomirsky on her latest book, How to Feel Loved, the 5 Mindsets That Get You More of What Matters Most. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 45% off site-wide, plus a professional measure at no cost. Rules and restrictions apply.